What happens when the foundations of your world collapse, when the gods you once knelt before are declared dead, and the echoes of their silence deafen your soul? Welcome to True Freedom, a sanctuary where we dare to confront life's deepest questions through the piercing lens of philosophy. Today, we stand at the edge of an abyss with Friedrich Nietzsche, a thinker whose revolutionary ideas illuminate the path from despair to defiance. His life, a tapestry woven with brilliance, suffering, and unrelenting courage, offers not just a reflection of our struggles, but a clarion call to rise above them, to become the architects of our own greatness. Nietzsche didn't merely observe the unraveling of Western faith, he prophesied it, mourned it, and then dared to imagine what could emerge from its ashes. Born into a devout Lutheran family in 1844, his early years were steeped in Christian piety until tragedy tore through his innocence, leaving him to question the very existence of divine justice. From the lecture halls of Bonn to the solitary peaks of the Swiss Alps, Nietzsche's journey mirrors the chaos and clarity of a mind wrestling with eternity. His works thus spokes are of Testa, beyond good and evil, and more aren't dusty tomes but living manifestos, urging us to shed the chains of outdated morality and forge meaning through the Übermensch, the Overman. At True Freedom, we believe philosophy isn't a relic to be admired, but a flame to be wielded, a tool to ignite personal liberation. Over the next 500 words, and beyond, we'll trace Nietzsche's path, his rejection of faith, his embrace of suffering, and his vision of a life affirmed through ceaseless self-creation. How do we find purpose when the sacred dies? How do we transform pain into power? This isn't just a study of Nietzsche, it's an invitation to step into his challenge to bury the gods of old and give birth to the truest version of yourself. Join us on this odyssey, for in Nietzsche's words and world, we uncover the art of becoming who we were always meant to be. Friedrich Nietzsche stands as a colossus, astride the fault lines of modern history, a philosopher whose voice reverberates through the tremors of a world unshackled from its ancient moorings. He emerged at a moment of profound rupture, when the edifice of Western religious tradition began to crack and crumble, exposing a vast emptiness where once stood certainty. Nietzsche didn't merely witness this collapse, he dissected it, predicted its fallout, and offered bold, audacious ideas to bridge the chasm it left behind. His life's work became a beacon for those navigating the twilight of faith, illuminating a path not toward despair or nihilism, but toward a radical reimagining of human value and purpose. Born in 1844 in the quiet town of Aachen, Saxony, within the Kingdom of Prussia, now part of Eastern Germany, Nietzsche entered a world of modest means and deep piety. His father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, was the village's Lutheran pastor, a man whose sermons and presence steeped young Friedrich in the rituals of Christian devotion. This early immersion shaped a boy whose intellect sparkled, even amid the simplicity of rural life. Yet, fate soon wielded its cruel hand. At 5 years old, Nietzsche watched his father waste away from a terminal brain disease, enduring a year of agony before dying at just 35. The following year, his younger brother, Ludwig, followed, snatched away in infancy. These losses, sharp, senseless, and irreconcilable, cast long shadows over Nietzsche's formative years, planting the seeds of a skepticism that would one day uproot his faith entirely. The somber, solitary childhood followed, marked by introspection and a burgeoning intellect. Nietzsche's promise shone brightly as he pursued theology at the University of Bonn, excelling in Christian studies with a mind that seemed destined to uphold the tradition of his father. Yet, within a single semester, the cracks in his belief widened. Exposure to critiques of Christianity, coupled with his own sharpening reason, forced him to confront the dissonance of his upbringing. The God who permitted such suffering could no longer command his allegiance. Shedding the skin of innocence, Nietzsche turned to philology, the study of languages, historical evolution, at the University of Leipzig. Here, his brilliance soared, earning him a professorship in classical philology at the University of Basel at the unprecedented age of 24, a record that stands unbroken. But academia, with its stifling conventions, soon chafed against Nietzsche's restless spirit. His health, too, began to falter, a confluence of inherited ailments, and, scholars speculate, syphilis contracted in his youth. After a few years, he abandoned his post, choosing instead a life of wandering solitude. Sustained by a modest pension, he roamed Europe, seeking climates to soothe his frail body. The Swiss Alps became his haven, a rugged sanctuary where, amid bouts of illness, he walked, thought, and wrote. It was here, in the crisp mountain air, that Nietzsche produced his most enduring works, Human, All Too Human. The Gay Science, thus spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, and On the Genealogy of Morals. These texts didn't merely critique, they demolished, unfastening the bolts of moral certainty, dismantling notions of absolute truth, and beckoning humanity to forge its own destiny. At the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy lies a seismic proclamation: God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. These words, often misunderstood as a triumphant cry, are instead a mournful warning, a recognition that the demise of Christian faith threatens to unravel the entire fabric of Western morality. Nietzsche saw this collapse not as an end but as a beginning, a perilous opportunity. Without a divine anchor, humanity risked drifting into nihilism, a void where meaning dissolves into despair. Yet he refused to surrender to this fate. Instead, he challenged the very notion of universal truth. There are no facts, only interpretations, he wrote, rejecting the quest for an objective truth as a delusion. It saps the vitality of human experience. To chase a singular certainty, he argued, is to rob life of its subjective richness, its capacity for personal creation. This insight turned Nietzsche's gaze toward the arts and humanities, realms where music, literature, philosophy, and theater could weave threads of meaning once spun by religion. He saw in these creative acts a potential salve for the soul, a way to bridge the divine void. But he soon discerned their fragility. Too often, culture calcified into academic sterility or bowed to commodification, losing its power to inspire. And daunted, Nietzsche pivoted inward, crafting a philosophy that placed meaning's burden squarely on the individual. Enter the Übermensch, or Overman, unveiled in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. This figure is no caped crusader, but a defiant ideal, a being who pursues personal desires with unapologetic fervor, unshackled by collective norms, embodying a morality that celebrates strength over meekness, ambition over modesty. The Overman springs from Nietzsche's concept of the will to power, the pulsing force he believed animates all life. The world is the will to power and nothing besides, he declared, framing it not as domination over others, but as mastery over oneself. This power is psychological and spiritual, and lay resilience, forged through relentless growth. Unlike physical might, it thrives in the quiet victories of self-overcoming, in the courage to face one's fears and transcend one's limits. The Overman, then, is an unreachable star, a beacon that fuels this ceaseless striving. If we have our own lie in life, we shall get along with almost anyhow, Nietzsche wrote, suggesting that purpose transforms suffering into a noble endeavor, a catalyst for greatness. Here, Nietzsche parts ways with his predecessor, Arthur Schopenhauer, who counseled retreat from suffering. For Nietzsche, suffering isn't a curse to flee but a forge to embrace, a raw material for crafting strength. The meaninglessness of suffering, not suffering itself, was the curse that lay over mankind so far, he contended. To live authentically is to lean into pain, to wield it as fuel for self-discovery. This process of self-overcoming a cycle of dissatisfaction, improvement, and renewal becomes the antidote to nihilism, a way to birth meaning from chaos. It's a radical alchemy, turning the lead of despair into the gold of affirmation, affirming life not despite its trials, but because of them. Nietzsche's own life mirrored this philosophy in haunting ways. As later years unfolded in isolation, shadowed by illness, heartbreak, and fractured ties, yet from this crucible, his pen blazed, etching ideas that would outlive him. At 44, his mind began to splinter. In Turin, witnessing a horse flogged in the street, he rushed to its side, sobbing, I understand you, a moment of raw compassion that seemed to contradict his disdain for pity. Was it weakness, or a final, tragic glimpse of his humanity? Soon after, madness claimed him, plunging him into catatonia. In 1900, at 55, a stroke silenced him forever. By his own measure, his life might have been a failure, his books unsold, his genius unseen. Yet posthumously, his voice roared, reshaping thought and culture in ways both profound and, at times, tragically misused. Nietzsche's ideas are not without fault lines. His exaltation of suffering and the Overman invites scrutiny. Can relentless pursuit of an unattainable ideal truly sustain all? For those who view life as inherently bleak, crafting a life-affirming purpose may feel like grasping at phantoms. If one rejects suffering as a virtue, his framework risks collapsing into a maze with no exit. His philosophy, sprawling and at times self-contradictory, resists steady systems, offering instead a kaleidoscope of interpretations. Yet this openness is its strength, not a doctrine to follow blindly, but a spark to kindle our own fires. Nietzsche doesn't command us to agree. He dares us to wrestle with him, to carve our own paths through the wilderness of existence. In this interplay of death and rebirth, Nietzsche offers a radical freedom, the freedom to bury the gods of old and give birth to ourselves anew. Was life solitary, brilliant, sacrificial, embodies the very process he extolled. To become who we truly are, he whispers across time, we must shed convention's husk, embrace our struggles, and sculpt meaning from the void. His call to greatness isn't a gift bestowed, but a challenge earned, a summons to awaken the Overman within, to live not as echoes of the past but as creators of our own eternal now. At True Freedom, we've walked Nietzsche's rugged path from the death of God to the birth of a self-defined existence. His philosophy isn't a distant echo, but a living pulse, urging us to transform suffering into strength and chaos into purpose. The Übermensch stands as both a mirror and a mountain, an ideal that reflects our potential and challenges us to climb. Nietzsche's gift is this: meaning isn't inherited, it's forged, a flame kindled in the heart of struggle. What will you create from the ashes of your own gods? How does his call to greatness stir you? Share your reflections below. Do his ideas light your path or spark new questions? If this journey moved you, pass it along to a fellow seeker and subscribe to True Freedom for more doses of wisdom. Next, join us for a special discussion with Liam and Charlotte, who'll unpack Nietzsche's legacy and share their own insights right after this. Let's keep the flame burning. Your voice is part of this great becoming.
Welcome to our deep dive into the world of Friedrich Nietzsche. He's one of those philosophers whose ideas still have this electric charge, even over a century later.
Yeah, definitely still relevant.
Today we're going to explore his concept of the death of God and the emergence of the Overman, which are some seriously big ideas.
Huge. What's fascinating about Nietzsche is that his life, really mirrored his philosophy, full of intense highs and lows. He didn't just want to, analyze philosophy. He wanted to live it.
Yeah, and he certainly did. I mean, think about it. He became a university professor at the unbelievably young age of 24. But then he walked away from that prestigious career to pursue his own path. Writing in solitude, often in the Swiss Alps, it makes you wonder what would make someone give up that kind of security.
Right. It points to a fearlessness, a willingness to challenge conventions, and that's reflected in his philosophy, which directly questioned the very foundations of Western thought.
Yeah, it seems like his early life played a role in shaping his worldview, too. Losing his father and brother at such young ages must have been incredibly difficult. I wonder if those experiences fueled his questioning of faith and traditional morality.
Absolutely. Those losses probably led him to question the idea of a benevolent God. And as he began to doubt, he was forced to search for alternative sources of meaning and value, which he ultimately found in the power of the individual.
That's a powerful concept. Finding meaning in the individual when the traditional structure seemed to be crumbling. So to really understand Nietzsche, we need to understand the context of his time. This was a period when those traditional religious beliefs were starting to be challenged by scientific advancements and cultural shifts.
Yeah, imagine the ground shifting beneath your feet. The familiar structures of meaning were collapsing. And that's the world Nietzsche was responding to. His work is an attempt to find solid footing in a new, uncertain landscape.
Okay, so that leads us to his famous and often misunderstood quote, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him." It's a powerful statement. And I'm curious, was he celebrating the demise of God?
Not at all. It was more of a warning. He was saying that the loss of a shared foundation for morality and meaning could lead to nihilism and despair.
So if there's no God to dictate right and wrong, how do we make sense of our lives? What guides our choices and gives us a sense of purpose? I think that's something we can all relate to even today.
Definitely a question for the ages. For Nietzsche, this absence of God presented both a danger and an opportunity. The danger was the potential for meaninglessness, but the opportunity lay in the chance to create our own values and become the authors of our own lives.
That brings us to another thought-provoking idea of his. There are no facts, only interpretations. That one really makes you stop and think. Does that mean that there's no objective truth?
Well, it suggests that we are constantly shaping our reality through our interpretations. Rather than discovering a single truth, we create meaning through our choices, perspectives, and actions.
That's both liberating and a bit daunting, wouldn't you say? We have the power to shape our destinies. But it also means that the responsibility falls squarely on our shoulders.
Precisely. And this is where Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, or overman, comes in. It's not about superpowers, but rather an ideal to strive for, a way of living that embraces this freedom and responsibility.
So it's less like Superman,
Yeah.
and more like someone who has mastered themselves, someone who sets their own rules and lives by them. It reminds me of Nietzsche himself rejecting societal expectations and leaving academia to follow his own path.
Right. His life was a testament to this striving for self-mastery. He faced immense challenges, both physically and emotionally, but he never stopped writing, thinking, and pushing himself to grow.
And that brings us to will to power, which is often misunderstood as a desire to control others. But I have a feeling it's much deeper than that.
Yeah, you're right. For Nietzsche, it was more about a fundamental drive for growth and self-overcoming. Think of it as the force that drives us to create, to achieve, to constantly strive to become something more than we were before.
So it's about reaching our full potential, even in the face of obstacles. That makes me wonder, how did Nietzsche view suffering? Was it something to be avoided?
Surprisingly, no. He actually saw suffering as a crucial part of growth and resilience. He famously said, the meaninglessness of suffering, not suffering itself, was the curse that lay over mankind so far. It challenges us to rethink our relationship with pain and hardship.
So he's suggesting that suffering only becomes a curse if we fail to find meaning in it. What if, instead of trying to escape it, we can learn from it and use it as fuel for growth?
That's the essence of it. Nietzsche diverges from other philosophers, like Schopenhauer, who advocated for escaping suffering. Nietzsche believed it could be transformative, a crucible where our strength and resilience are forged.
That's a powerful perspective. It makes you wonder about your own relationship with suffering. Do you see it as something to be avoided at all costs? Or could it actually be an opportunity for growth?
It's a question we all grapple with. Nietzsche's perspective encourages us to consider that our struggles, our pain, can be woven into the tapestry of a meaningful life.
That reminds me of the poignant story about Nietzsche's mental breakdown and his empathy for a mistreated horse. He cried out, "I understand you," while embracing the animal. It's a powerful image that reveals his compassion, even as he championed strength and self-overcoming.
It highlights the complexity of his character. He wasn't simply a cold, calculating philosopher preaching about power. He was a human being capable of profound empathy and sensitivity.
It's a reminder that strength and compassion can coexist, and that even the strongest among us can be vulnerable.
And perhaps that's what makes his work so enduring. He speaks to the human condition in all its messy glory, acknowledging both our capacity for greatness and our susceptibility to pain.
Sadly, Nietzsche's life ended in tragedy, with him descending into madness and dying relatively unknown.
But his legacy lived on, and his ideas, once dismissed by many, would later influence everything from philosophy and literature to art and even pop culture.
It's a testament to the power of his ideas and their ability to resonate across generations. I'm curious, what aspect of his life stands out most to you?
For me, it's his courage in the face of suffering, and his willingness to challenge conventional thinking, even when it meant going against the grain. How about you?
I think it's his incredible intellectual curiosity and the depth of his thinking. His work challenges us to think differently, to question our assumptions, and to forge our own paths in a world that's constantly changing.
And that's what makes diving deep into Nietzsche so rewarding. We're only scratching the surface here in part 1, but there's so much more to explore.
We'll be back in part 2 to delve even deeper into Nietzsche's groundbreaking ideas and explore how they can help us navigate the complexities of modern life. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Friedrich Nietzsche.
It's been quite a journey so far, hasn't it?
It really has.
We started by talking about Nietzsche's famous proclamation, God is dead, and what that meant for a society moving away from traditional sources of meaning and morality.
Yeah, it's like he threw out the old rule book and asked, what now? But rather than leaving us in a state of panic, he offered a way forward with his concept of the Übermensch, or overman.
Right. And remember, the overman isn't about some kind of superhuman strength or dominance. It's about inner strength, self-mastery, and having the courage to create your own values when those old answers no longer seem to apply.
So it's more about taking responsibility for your own life choices and meaning, rather than relying on external authorities.
Exactly. And that's where Nietzsche's idea of the will to power comes into play. He saw it as a fundamental force driving us all, a striving for growth, expansion, and self-overcoming.
We talked about that plant pushing through concrete. And I'm starting to see how that analogy applies to this idea. It's not about crushing obstacles, but rather that relentless drive to reach your full potential.
That's a great way to visualize it. And for Nietzsche, this will to power wasn't about dominating others. It was about mastering yourself, pushing your own boundaries, and constantly striving to become more than you were yesterday.
That makes me think about how we can actually tap into that inner strength. It sounds like Nietzsche had some pretty unconventional ideas about how to do that, especially when it comes to suffering.
He definitely did. One of the most challenging aspects of his philosophy is this idea that suffering isn't something to be avoided at all costs. Instead, he saw it as a necessary part of growth and self-discovery.
I remember that quote we mentioned earlier. The meaninglessness of suffering, not suffering itself, was the curse that lay over mankind so far. It seems like he was suggesting that we can actually find meaning in suffering.
It's a radical idea, especially in a world that often encourages us to avoid pain and discomfort. But Nietzsche believed that facing our challenges head-on could actually lead to a deeper sense of meaning and purpose.
This is about building resilience, like working out a muscle.
Yeah.
The more resistance we encounter, the stronger we become.
That's a great analogy. And just like avoiding strain can cause a muscle to atrophy, Nietzsche believed that constantly trying to avoid discomfort would weaken our minds and spirits. He felt that by pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zones, we develop resilience, grit, and a deeper understanding of ourselves.
So how do we apply this idea of embracing suffering to our own lives? Is it about actively seeking out difficult situations?
Not necessarily. It's more about shifting our perspective. Instead of seeing challenges as obstacles to be avoided, we can view them as opportunities for growth. It's about asking ourselves, what can I learn from this? Rather than, why is this happening to me?
It sounds like it's about accepting that suffering is an inevitable part of life, and that we can transform it from a source of despair into something that can fuel our growth.
That's a great way to put it. And that leads us to Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, a Latin phrase that means love of fate.
That sounds intriguing. What does it mean to love your fate?
It's about accepting everything that life throws our way, the good and the bad, with a sense of gratitude and affirmation. It's about saying yes to life, with all its messy glory. Embracing the highs and lows is part of what makes us who we are.
That's a beautiful concept. But I imagine it's challenging to put into practice. How do we cultivate that kind of acceptance when we're faced with difficult situations or things that seem unfair?
You're absolutely right. It's not easy. And it's not about pretending that everything is fine when it's not. It's about finding a way to acknowledge the reality of the situation, while also looking for the potential for growth and meaning within those experiences.
So it's not about toxic positivity or denying our feelings, but rather about acknowledging the difficulty.
Yeah.
And still finding a way to move forward.
Exactly. And one way to think about this is through Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence. Now, this is more of a thought experiment than a literal belief. He asked us to imagine living our lives over and over again, exactly as they've been, with all the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and failures. Would we embrace this eternal repetition, or would we recoil in horror?
Wow, that's a powerful thought experiment. It's like being caught in a cosmic time loop, reliving the same life, the same experiences over and over again.
And for Nietzsche, it was a way to challenge ourselves to live lives that we would be willing to repeat. Lives filled with passion, purpose, and meaning.
So it's about asking ourselves, if I had to live this life again, would I make different choices? Would I live more fully? Would I embrace the challenges more wholeheartedly?
Precisely. And if the answer is no, then maybe it's time to make some changes, to start living in a way that we would be proud to repeat.
That's a great point. So how do we actually make those changes? How do we start living more authentically, more intentionally, in a way that feels truly aligned with our values?
Nietzsche believed that cultivating a life-affirming perspective was key to a meaningful life. This means embracing life in all its fullness, with all its joys and sorrows, challenges and triumphs.
So it's about finding beauty and meaning, even in the mundane, even in the midst of suffering.
Exactly. And this ties back to the will to power we discussed earlier. It's about mastering ourselves, overcoming our limitations, and striving to become the best versions of ourselves.
But it's not about forcing ourselves to be happy all the time, right? It's more about approaching life with a sense of purpose and intention.
You're right. It's about bringing our full presence and attention to each moment, whether we're working, playing, creating, or simply being.
It's about seeing every moment as an opportunity to learn, to grow, to express our unique gifts.
And ultimately, this leads us back to the concept of the overman. Remember, it's not about achieving some ultimate state of perfection. It's an ideal to strive for, a way of being characterized by constant growth, self-overcoming, and the pursuit of excellence.
So it's about living a life that's filled with passion, purpose, and meaning. A life that's worthy of being lived over and over again, even with all the challenges that come with it.
And as we continue our deep dive into Nietzsche's philosophy, we'll explore some of the practical tools and techniques he offered for cultivating self-awareness, embracing suffering, and unleashing our will to power.
That sounds fascinating. I'm ready to dive even deeper in part 3 and explore how we can apply these ideas to create a more meaningful and fulfilling life. Welcome back to the final part of our Nietzsche Odyssey. We've covered a lot of ground, from the death of God to the overman, and I'm excited to see where we go from here.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey through some of Nietzsche's most challenging and thought-provoking ideas.
But I think what's really important is how we can use these ideas to empower ourselves to live more meaningful lives, especially in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we'll focus on today. We'll explore some practical takeaways from Nietzsche's philosophy and how we can apply them to our own challenges and our quest for meaning.
Okay, so let's revisit the concept of amor fati that we talked about earlier to refresh our memories. It's about embracing everything life throws our way, the good and the bad, with a sense of acceptance and even gratitude.
Right. It's about saying yes to life with all its messy complexities, recognizing that both the highs and the lows contribute to who we are.
That sounds great in theory, but it can't be easy to put into practice. How do we actually cultivate this love of fate when we're faced with difficult circumstances, like loss or things that just don't seem fair?
Yeah, it's definitely not about pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's about acknowledging the reality of a situation, allowing ourselves to feel whatever emotions come up, but also looking for the potential for growth and meaning, even within those difficult experiences.
So it's about finding a way to integrate those experiences into our lives,
Right.
to learn from them, and maybe even use them to become more compassionate and understanding.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that challenges and even suffering are inevitable parts of life. What matters is how we choose to respond to them.
And that brings to mind Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence. It's a fascinating thought experiment,
Sure.
where he asks us to imagine living our lives over and over again, exactly as they have been. Would we embrace it? Or would the thought fill us with dread?
It's a powerful concept, isn't it? It challenges us to consider whether we're living in a way that we'd be willing to repeat for all eternity.
I imagine it would really make you reflect on your choices and priorities.
Yeah.
Would you want to change anything if you knew you had to relive it all again?
Exactly. And if we found ourselves filled with regret, it might be a sign that it's time to reevaluate how we're living and make some changes.
That's a great point. So if we decide we do want to make changes and live more authentically, where do we even begin?
Well, Nietzsche believed that one key to a meaningful life was to cultivate what he called a life-affirming perspective. This means embracing life in all its fullness, even with the inevitable sorrows and setbacks.
So it's about finding beauty and meaning even in the everyday moments and choosing to focus on the good, even when things are tough.
Yes. And it's also about tapping into that will to power we talked about earlier. It's that drive within us to grow, learn, create, connect, and fully experience the richness of life.
So rather than trying to control everything, it's about embracing the process of becoming the best version of ourselves.
Exactly. And one way to do that is by pursuing our passions. What are those things that truly light you up? The activities that make you feel most alive?
It's about finding those things we do even if no one was watching. or we weren't getting paid for it, right? Those activities that truly resonate with us.
Yes. Those are the things that tap into our will to power and help us become more fully ourselves.
So it's not just about what we do, but also how we approach it, bringing a sense of purpose and intention to every moment.
You got it. Whether we're working,
Yeah.
playing, or simply being, we can try to be fully present and engaged, treating each moment as an opportunity to learn and grow.
That's a great reminder. And I think it circles back to Nietzsche's concept of the Overman. It's not about becoming a superhero or reaching some unattainable level of perfection, but rather embracing the journey of continuous growth and self-discovery.
Absolutely. It's about striving to live a life filled with passion and meaning, a life that feels worthy of repeating, even with all its imperfections.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Friedrich Nietzsche, I want to ask you, what's one thing you'll take away from this exploration? What resonated most with you?
I think for me, it's the reminder that we have the power to shape our own lives and create meaning even in the face of challenges. How about you?
I'm really drawn to the idea of amor fati, of learning to embrace everything that life throws our way, the good and the bad. It's a challenge for sure, but also a powerful invitation to live more fully.
I couldn't agree more. And perhaps that's the most valuable lesson we can learn from Nietzsche, that we have a choice in how we respond to life's challenges, and that even in the face of hardship, we can find meaning and grow.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Nietzsche's thought-provoking world. We hope you found it as enlightening and inspiring as we have. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep striving to become the best versions of yourselves.